Hi, I'm Andy Parr, and you're watching the Gadget Guru. Believe it or not, this is now part 8 of my Prevost for Newbies series, and today we're going to focus in on a very important decision that you'll need to make if you decided that a new or pre-owned Prevost is in your future. And that decision is simply, which chassis do I want? Do I want one like this one right here? This is the H3. Or do I want one with a shiny stainless steel exterior, such as this model, an XL, an XL2, or an X3, such as the one I have? Well, we're going to bring back our old friend Gil Johnson, and he's going to help us out because we're going to talk about chassis as the Gadget Guru continues right after this. I'm sure you remember this guy. This is Gil Johnson, and we're at the Prevost Expo, West Palm Beach, Florida. And I have to tell you, as I've told others before, at last year's Prevost Expo, when it was at Tampa, is where I found my coach. And you were the guy who was responsible for helping me shop. And I just want to thank you very much. I've been loving my coach.
Oh, you're most welcome.
I'll hold the mic.
You'll hold the mic. Okay, go ahead. You're most welcome.
See, before we used lavalier mics, I'm having to teach them all over again. But you've done a great job about teaching me my bus. Now, before we get started, one more thank you. Thanks to the folks at Pantera Luxury Coach. We're in their booth. The show doesn't open for a couple more days. They were kind enough to let us come in here, so thanks to you guys. Now, Gil, as you and I were talking, and as I said in the introduction, I already had an idea that I wanted the X, and I was doing it basically on looks. Let's start off. What are the basic differences between an X and an H chassis?
Well, first off, everybody's going to be attracted to the X. It's the historical look of a Prevost. But there's some significant differences. Both stainless steel chassis, you don't have to worry about them. They're both million-mile chassis. But when you start to look at the differences in them, the H, you might think, is a much taller headroom coach because it's at rest about a foot taller than an X. But in fact, the headroom within an H is shorter. That's why you seldom see them in the entertainer community. But because the floor is elevated, when you're sitting in that campground, you get a better elevation. You're higher in the campgrounds, you're looking out over that lake or whatever the sites are where you're at. But there's some people that still are not just attracted to the looks of an X, but the floor plan in an X is a little bit different. Now, when I say floor plan, I don't really mean floor plan. I mean the flooring in an X is a single floor. So the driver, the passenger, and the living space is all on the same level. The most significant difference between these two chassis is in that H, the driver's position is down, the passenger's position slightly elevated, and then the living area is elevated but beyond that. Why is that important? Well, the biggest importance there is some people want to maximize the living space in that coach. And in X, the passenger seat can turn around and become part of the living space. In an H, you'll seldom ever see a passenger seat that has the ability to swivel around, and certainly not at the same level, to become part of that living area. So that's kind of the fundamental differences on what gets a person to gravitate to the H or the X. Obviously, the looks of the X are stunning, but the H really is a good coach. I've owned both, an XL. I currently own an H3. I can tell you that there's pluses and minuses on both. But at the end of the day, they're both Prevost, the safest motorhome chassis out there. So either one you pick, great choices.
In the previous segment, what it's like to drive a Prevost, I made a comment, and I really like this. In my X3, with the higher seating position, I truly feel like it's a king of the road position. Now, I've never driven an H3, so I really can tell you, but I know when I sit in them, you're higher, than what a car is. But there's just something about that I really like. Now, let's go through the different generations. I know there's an XL, there's an XL2, and the X3. What's the best way, or what do we need to understand about the different models?
On the H side, there's few differences that are in aesthetics. So an H is an H that's always been an H. There's not going to see a lot of differences. Obviously, every coach that Prevost made, there's been enhancements. Not many of them would be obvious to the owner. Now, the biggest one on the X, so we went from an XL, that's the riveted side coach, the classic-looking coach. Not one that Prevost ever put Prevost slides in. To the XL, again, nice polished stainless sides, no rivets. and then they introduced their own slides. And the XL came in 2 chassis, but let's just focus on the motorhome side. So the motorhome wheelbase between an H and an X and the XL2 was roughly the same. But when they transitioned to the X3, the latest version of the polished stainless coach like you have, the biggest difference that happened there is they eliminated the biggest difference between a motorhome chassis and an entertainer chassis, which was the wheelbase. So now if you go to an X3, it'll be a longer wheelbase, which means a better ride, but it also means a little bit more challenge getting into tight turns. For converters, and although you don't really, that's not a big thing, but you should realize an X3 is a harder, probably the hardest chassis to convert. That longer wheelbase challenges the converters to keep the weight off the front axle. So biggest differences, I think that's the ones that highlight it. An H has always been an H, very little differences. Windows change, they went from frame to frameless windows. All of these things are minor. The biggest differences, I think, were in the X that we've just went over.
How about the driving characteristics from the seat to, your hands on the wheel? Any difference in the method it handles wind, how it feels on the road? Is one of the chassis softer or firmer than the other?
Yeah, so ride, I think the rides are comparable between the two. Now, there are people that would suggest, and I don't really see this, but in an H, some people would tell you that when you get into tight turns, getting off the interstate or whatever those turns might be, that they actually feel more lean than they would have felt in an X that they previously owned or previously driven. Now, part of that probably just comes from where you physically sit in the coach. But I think the important part here is that when we drive these motorhomes, these are not Ferraris, and we tend to try to slow down around these turns and take them nice and gradual, like we've got passengers asleep. I'm not saying we do, but we want to make sure that that ride is as smooth as we can. We're not in a big hurry to get around a turn. So that's the biggest ride difference that some have claimed is that, and the other part is that geometry difference between the driver and the passenger. So in all of the coaches, the passenger's slightly behind, but in an H, they're slightly behind and above. So some people, that's a little bit more awkward when they want to turn and have a little bit of a conversation with whoever is the passenger seat.
I was always understand that the H was a taller coach, but then I found out, when I had my X3 measured, I believe I came in at 13 feet 4 inches. My new garage is 13 feet 7, and I make it by about that much. When they went to the X3, did they elevate the height of the coach?
No, the H3 is still a taller coach, but it really depends on what the converters put on the roofs. So the difference in height between a factory-delivered X and a factory-delivered H is not quite a foot, but there's almost a foot difference. Again, the headroom in the H is less because it's all in the bays. So with that mass storage that's available in a bay, you have some people that want to put small golf carts or they want to put their Harley in there, which they can do in an H, but you can't do that in an X.
What is the bay height difference between the two?
I've never put a measuring stick on it, but I'm sitting here looking at the two, and it's got to be well over a foot difference in height between the two coaches.
I guess that depends how you travel. I was just talking to, the folks at the St. Lucie West Motor Coach Resort, and we were talking about, that a lot of people there have gone to the H because of storage. And we came to the decision, it all has to do with how you use your coach. The way I use mine, I haven't gotten to the point where I've run out of space yet. And I guess it's kind of good because I do like to pack a lot and I don't want to put too much weight in. Now, one more question. I'm sure that once you're an owner, this might not be a question you asked beforehand, but once you're an owner, you're going to need to be aware. What's the difference between the maintenance or keeping an H versus an X chassis maintained?
Well, the H chassis is an all fiberglass sided coach. You're going to have all paint. So that's, you're going to treat that like you're going to treat your luxury car. Now, an X that's got the stainless steel panels on it, then the maintenance associated with stainless is going to be, depending on where you live and how you use it, could be a little bit more. Other than that, they got the same drivetrain. Everything about the chassis is fundamentally the same. They both are all stainless. There's little difference in maintainability between the two coaches. Most of it has to do with the outward appearance and the maintaining of that.
Now, I know I said last question. I guess I fibbed a bit. Let me ask you about the paint. Granted, you have a lot more creative or a larger canvas on an H. You pretty much have, the whole sides on that. On the X, with the stainless steel, that can go roughly up to half the height of the coach. Are there any limitations of paint on the stainless steel sides?
You can put as much paint over the stainless as you want. All the paint jobs tend to go into the stainless area. Typically these are delivered and they're not shiny stainless, they're dull. They polish them and then paint them.
Before we wrap up, I know you always have some great words of wisdom. So you get somebody, just like we said in the opening, they've decided they want to get either a new or pre-owned Prevost. Before they get to floor plan, I guess my first part of the question is picking the chassis the next thing they need to do? And if so, what's some words of wisdom of what they need to look for when shopping?
Well, that really is driven by the person that's about to buy one. So if, like yourself, you don't need a lot of storage space, so an H is not really something that you would benefit from. But I tell most customers, after we understand what it is that they're driving for, aesthetics are everything. You've already decided on the best coach. Aesthetically, do you like the look of an H more than you like the look of an X? And that multi-tiered floor can be a showstopper for some. So we really have to get past those two things. Should I buy an X or an H? There's a lot that goes into that decision, and you need to sit in one. So aesthetically, you're in love with the stainless. I got that. Let's sit in them and see the difference. If you're a really tall person that loves to have a lot of space above your head, you're going to want to be in an X because you've got 3 or 4 inches taller in that coach.
It's funny. I'm barely 5.5 feet tall. I can't even touch the ceiling. I could have gone with either coach, but again, you're right. It was about aesthetics, and to me, I like the higher driving position. One more thing. Let me point out, throughout this series, when we first started, I couldn't have done it without this guy. And again, I don't know. I hate to make this like it's a shameless plug because it's not. You didn't know I was going to say that. Anybody who's shopping for a Prevost, if you're confused, if you need some assistance, I don't even know what he charges this morning. I don't understand. Your phone's ringing off these days. He gave me honest, straightforward advice and explained it to me. And I'm not a mechanical person, in a very non-mechanical manner. And Gil, I appreciate that. I still text him every once in a while, say, "Help, Gil, what do I do now?" You've just been a great friend and great help for me. If people want to get a hold of you, what's the best way to contact you?
Email or call me. My phone number is 813-394-7470.
Gil, thank you so much for your time. Hey, we got a great show coming up, the next few days. I don't know what other videos we're going to do. We might be taking a look at some battery systems. It's just going to be whatever we find here at the show. And remember, the easiest way to keep posted of my new videos, stories, or whatever is just to like me on Facebook at facebook.com/The Gadget Guru. Don't forget to subscribe right here on YouTube. And remember, if you like this video, you're going to like this one. And if you like that one, you're going to like this one too. That's it for now. I'm the Gadget Guru, Andy Parr.